I was 80 years old that spring, and though my steps had slowed and my knees ached on cold mornings, my hands still worked with a precision that gave me pride. Those hands had baked pies for every family holiday, sewn quilts for newborns, and held books for eager children in my years as a librarian. Just the week before, those same hands had finished a project that mattered more to me than any quilt or pie. I had stitched a small velvet bear, soft to the touch, with glassy eyes and a hidden heart. Inside the heart, I created a secret pocket, barely large enough for what I tucked into it, a diamond that had belonged to my grandmother, a diamond she carried across the Atlantic when she fled war-torn Europe in 1947 to begin a new life in America. That diamond had been in my family for generations, not only valuable in dollars, but priceless in meaning. I tied a ribbon around the bear, wrapped it in paper, and held it on my lap as the taxi carried me to New York City for my nephew's engagement party. The party was held in a ballroom on Fifth Avenue, tall ceilings glittering with chandeliers, every table dressed in white lilies and crystal glassware. A string quartet played near the corner, and servers in black vests carried trays of champagne. The air was full of chatter, the kind that spoke of money and ease, menus for the wedding dinner, rare wines to be ordered, vacation homes in Martha's Vineyard for the honeymoon. I stepped into the room quietly, as I often do, knowing I was not the main attraction, but still hoping for warmth. The velvet bear felt safe in my arms, like a piece of the past I was determined to pass on. My nephew Daniel looked every bit the part of a successful young man. His tuxedo was sharp, his shoes gleamed, and his smile dazzled under the lights. His bride-to-be, Charlotte, wore a shimmering dress that seemed to ripple like water when she moved. She was lovely, and I wanted to believe her loveliness was matched by grace. I stood patiently at the edge of the crowd, waiting for them to reach me, rehearsing the words I would say when I gave them the gift. "This is more than a bear," I would tell them. "This is family. This is love." When at last they came, I held out the package with both hands and said softly, "This is for you." Charlotte took the bear, unwrapped it, and for a moment her smile faltered. She turned it over once, twice, then gave a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. Someone nearby chuckled and said, "How quaint." Another guest whispered, "It looks homemade." Daniel, my nephew, did not come to my defense. He gave me a polite nod, said, "Thank you, Aunt Helen," and turned to greet another group of guests. The bear, with all its hidden worth, was set on a side table among glossy silver boxes and thick envelopes stuffed with checks. A flush of heat burned my cheeks. I wanted to tell them the truth, that the bear carried not only a diamond worth at least $120,000, but also the story of a woman who scrubbed Boston staircases so her family could eat, who kept that stone safe through years of struggle, who whispered to me as a child that one day it would mean something again. I wanted to shout that the bear was more valuable than all the crystal, silk, and champagne in the room. But I did not. I swallowed my pride. I did what I have done all my life when faced with dismissive laughter. I stood quiet, watched, and listened. The night wore on. Guests danced under the chandeliers, toasted the couple with champagne, and spoke about futures that seemed golden and assured. I remained on the edge of the room, sipping water, occasionally catching sight of the bear still sitting among the glittering packages. It looked small there, almost out of place, yet to me it was the most powerful object in the room. When the evening finally came to an end and the crowd began to thin, I searched for it again. The side table was empty. A server told me that all gifts had been moved to a suite upstairs for safekeeping. I nodded, though something inside me felt uneasy, as if the bear's fate had slipped from my hands. I returned home late that night to my cottage in Newport, Rhode Island. My house sat by the ocean, a pale shingle cottage with a porch that looked out onto the waves. That night, the sea was restless, slapping against the dark rocks like steady hands, each crash a reminder of time's persistence. I placed my coat on the hook, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window, staring into the night. I wanted sleep, but none came. My mind circled back again and again to the image of Charlotte's faltering smile and the careless laughter of the guests. The next morning brought a phone call from my sister Margaret, who lived in Providence. Her voice was light, almost sing-song, and I knew immediately that she was preparing to say something heavy. She spoke of my future, as if it were a puzzle she and others had already solved. She said the family had been talking that a retirement community in Connecticut would be good for me. She spoke of safety, of convenience, of the ease of letting others take care of things. Then, almost as if slipping it into the conversation like sugar into coffee, she asked if my cottage had a current appraisal. Her tone was casual, but I heard the true question under the words. My heart thumped like the surf against the rocks. I stirred my tea slowly and listened. The ocean outside cracked white against the shore, its voice louder than hers, but I understood every word she was saying. She was not only asking about my comfort. She was asking about my house, my home, the place where Thomas, my late husband, had painted the bedroom sea green so I could rest better, where he planted roses by the porch for me to smell in summer. My home, bought in 1979 for $86,000, is now worth more than $2 million. My sister's words wrapped around that house like vines, sly and persistent. I did not answer her questions directly. I simply said I would think about it. Then, with a steady hand, I hung up the phone. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, the cup of tea cooling in my palm. The house creaked as if reminding me of its years, of all it had sheltered. At last, I set the cup down, walked to the study, and pulled out a card from my drawer. On it was the number of my lawyer, Grace. I picked up the phone again, dialed, and when she answered, I said only one sentence. Grace, I think we need to talk. My cottage on Ocean Drive has never been the grandest house along the Rhode Island shoreline, but it has always been mine. A pale shingle house with a sloping roof and a porch that catches the sea breeze, it stands steady against storms that have shaken stronger mansions nearby. When Thomas and I first bought it in 1979 for $86,000, the roof leaked and the porch leaned so badly that our friends shook their heads. But Thomas would smile, slap the wood with his hand and say, "It's got good bones, Helen. Just like us." He was right. We patched the roof, rebuilt the porch, and filled every room with books, laughter, and the scent of salt carried in from the waves. Now, similar cottages along Ocean Drive sell for more than $2 million. Mine has been appraised more than once by curious realtors, though I always told them it wasn't for sale. The cottage has a rock wall that runs along the yard, a pair of blueberry bushes I planted 20 years ago, and a narrow path that winds down to a small public beach. Children play there in summer, their laughter rising above the gulls. To most, it is just another slice of oceanfront, but to me, it has always felt like it belonged to us. Inside, the rooms smell faintly of pine cleaner and salt. In the afternoons, when the sun slides through the western windows, golden squares stretch across the wooden floors, and I sometimes pause in the hallway just to let the light soak into me. Even after Thomas passed, the house never felt empty. It held him. It still does. After Margaret's unsettling call, I drove into downtown Newport to meet with my lawyer, Grace. Her office is in a brick building near the harbor, with wide windows that look out toward the fishing boats. Grace is younger than my own children, but she has a way of speaking that calms me, as though she has weathered every storm before. She listened without interruption as I told her about the party, about the mocking laughter, and about the bear that vanished into the shadows of a hotel suite. Then I told her about Margaret's phone call, about the suggestion of a retirement community, and about the casual question of my house's value. Grace leaned back in her chair, hands folded, and her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in careful thought. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "We need to put things in order, Helen. All of it." She made a list with a steady hand. She asked about my will, my bank accounts, my safe, and even the small savings bonds tucked away in my dresser. She asked for passwords for names of contacts, for every detail I could recall. "Knowledge is power," she said, "and we want you holding all of it." When I left her office that afternoon, I felt lighter but also uneasy. It is one thing to live quietly in a beloved house, and another to recognize how easily others might strip it from you. Back at home, I pulled the old iron safe from the closet and laid out the files on my kitchen table. Bank statements, insurance policies, deeds, tax returns, all of it. At the bottom of the pile, I found my grandmother's ledger. She wrote in perfect European script, each number carefully aligned in neat columns. Her handwriting carried the weight of someone who counted every dollar with gratitude and fear. She had scrubbed staircases in Boston brownstones, washed sheets for strangers, and saved pennies to keep food on the table. As I traced the lines of her writing, I could almost hear her humming in the cold stairwells, a tune that carried her through exhaustion. That ledger reminded me of who I was and where I came from. For 2 full days, I went through every paper. I wrote down balances. I called the bank in Newport to confirm my accounts and the credit union in Boston, where I still kept a small deposit box. At first, it felt like busy work, like gathering kindling. But then I began to see patterns, cracks in the polished surface of my family's lives. Margaret had guaranteed a business loan for Daniel in New York. His restaurant, the one he bragged about at every family dinner, was behind on payments. The loan documents showed missed installments, fees, and a looming deadline. To cover the shortfall, Margaret had put her own house in Providence up as collateral. On the surface, their lives gleamed with champagne parties and glossy photos, but the numbers told another story. Debt pressed against them like waves against fragile glass. The shock deepened when I discovered emails. My sister often used my old laptop when she visited, and she was never careful with passwords. One message to her friend left me chilled. She wrote that my cottage would be better in family hands and that a quick sale could help pay the wedding vendors and cover the restaurant's payroll. There it was, plain as ink. My house, the walls that still held Thomas's laughter, the porch where we watched sunsets, was nothing more than a solution to their financial mess. They were already making plans, weaving futures for my loss. I sat at the kitchen table with those papers spread before me. Outside, a gull stood on the rock wall as if guarding its kingdom, wings tucked, eyes sharp. I stared at it and thought, this house is my kingdom too. It is not just wood and stone. It is my last work, my last statement of who I am. I remembered repainting shingles when the wind ripped them loose, calling plumbers when the furnace coughed, planting beach roses for Thomas along the porch rail. I remembered him painting the bedroom sea green, saying the color would soothe my dreams. He has been gone 12 years, yet the house still holds his voice. Light as breath, it lingers in the hallways. I could not let them take it from me. Not like this. Not with whispers of retirement homes and quick sales. I picked up the phone and called Grace again. When she answered, I told her what I had found. I told her about the loan, the collateral, and the emails. She listened, asked a few sharp questions, and then laid out a plan. We'll move the cottage into a trust, she said. You will be the trustee. You'll decide who can touch a single board of it. If you wish, we can arrange a private sale. No listing, no gossip. Some buyers will pay cash for a home like yours. But the choice, Helen, will always remain yours. She explained terms carefully, capital gains, estate protections, and fees. She told me about a life estate, a way I could sell but still live in the house as long as I wished. She was patient as I asked my questions. When she was finished, she paused. What do you want to do, Helen? I looked at the ledger lying open on my table, the careful numbers my grandmother had recorded, the steady hand of a woman who survived by holding tight to what she owned. I thought of the mocking laughter at the party, the bear set aside like a trinket, the diamond hidden in its heart. I thought of Margaret's sweet voice on the phone, already plotting. Then I thought of the ocean outside my window, of the way it has always reminded me to be steady, to endure. I took a deep breath and gave Grace my answer. Make the calls. Grace and I worked quickly, our steps careful but without noise. She knew people, serious buyers who preferred privacy, those who didn't want to haggle or parade through open houses. Within a week, she introduced me to Olivia, a woman from Boston who worked in private equity. She was known to collect shoreline cottages the way others collected rare books or stamps. Olivia arrived on a foggy Tuesday morning, the kind of day when the sea seemed to rise into the air itself, wrapping everything in gray. She stepped into my cottage without fuss, her heels clicking softly on the old wood floor, and moved through the rooms as though she were listening for a pulse. She touched the window trim, ran her hand across the kitchen counter, and paused in the doorway of my bedroom, where Thomas's sea-green walls still shone in the light. She didn't chatter about upgrades or renovations. Instead, she stood quietly, as if acknowledging the weight of a life already lived within those walls. Then she turned to me and said in a voice that carried certainty, "I will honor what this house has been." Her offer was direct, $2,450,000, cash, 30-day close, with a lease back, so I could remain for the summer. Grace nodded, and I felt my throat tighten. My heart was heavy, yet I signed. The next day, we created the Blueberry Cove Trust, named for the bushes I had planted decades ago. Grace moved quickly, filing the papers, ensuring every board of that cottage now belonged only to me until I chose otherwise. The funds went into the trust account, untouchable by anyone else's hands. Grace arranged modest monthly transfers into my checking account, steady, simple, exactly how I liked it. From that balance, she helped me open a small education fund for my great-niece Lily. I had seen her sew a lunch bag out of old jeans at Thanksgiving, her small fingers mending with care. I thought of her bright eyes and her quiet talent, and I tucked away $150,000 for her future. That gave me peace. But news on the bay travels faster than the wind. By evening, Margaret called, and this time her voice carried no softness. "Helen, have you lost your mind?" she demanded. She reminded me that the wedding was just 2 weeks away. The vendors, she said, needed deposits. Daniel's restaurant needed a bridge loan. "The house is a family asset," she snapped, as though it had never truly been mine. I held the phone tight and answered with the only truth that mattered. "The house is my home, and it has been sold." Silence dropped heavy between us, a silence thick enough to choke. Then she spoke again, words sharp enough to cut. She called me selfish. She accused me of betrayal. She used numbers like weapons, hurling expenses, and debts as if they could shame me back into submission. Then she hung up, leaving me with a steady crash of the waves outside. 2 days later, Daniel appeared at my door in Newport, not alone but with Charlotte and her mother at his side. They entered my kitchen with coats too neat for the seaside and expressions as tight as the knots in a ship's rope. We sat at the table, coffee steaming between us, the sea humming outside the windows. Charlotte spoke first, her tone polished but brittle. "The bear you gave us was a cute idea," she said. "But, you know, Helen, that's why people use registries." Her words pierced deeper than she perhaps intended. I looked at her directly and replied, "That bear carried our family's diamond." Her eyes widened, surprise flickering into something closer to fear. "I never saw it," she said quickly. Daniel jumped in, suggesting a staff member must have packed it into storage with the other gifts. I reached for the phone and called the hotel immediately. The manager, a kind man with a warm Queen's accent, assured me no velvet bear had ever been found. As he spoke, my chest tightened, as though a hand gripped my ribs from the inside. My grandmother's stone, the symbol of survival and dignity, had vanished into a world that did not understand its worth. Daniel leaned forward then, his hands restless on the table. He asked for help with the restaurant payroll. "It's just a short gap, Aunt Helen," he said. $80,000, that's all. Just to get us through." Charlotte's mother chimed in with clipped precision, reminding me that the family's reputation was on the line, that investors whispered, that the wedding must proceed in grandeur. They looked at me as if I were the final stone that could steady their crumbling wall. I poured coffee into my cup and let their voices wash over me. When they finished, I placed my cup down with care and told them what I had discovered. I spoke of the emails, of Margaret's casual plans to move me into a retirement community, of the scheme to sell my cottage to fund their debts. Their faces shifted in shades of shock, anger, and guilt. Then I said plainly, "I have already sold the house myself. The trust will not fund your project." Daniel shot to his feet, so quickly his chair crashed to the floor. His jaw worked, but no words came. Charlotte's mother glared at me, her voice trembling with fury. "You are ruining your nephew's life," she spat. But Charlotte said nothing. She stood at the window, her reflection caught against the endless blue of the sea. After a long silence, she turned to me, her voice softer than before. "Is there truly a diamond in that bear?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Yes," I said. "And my grandmother sewed courage into it, too." For a heartbeat, her eyes met mine with something close to understanding. The weeks that followed unraveled like storm clouds splitting open. The wedding, once planned for a ballroom in New York City, was moved to a smaller space in Jersey City, borrowed from a friend. Vendors backed out when deposits failed to arrive. Guests whispered behind raised glasses. People pointed fingers at me, claiming I had caused trouble, that I had sabotaged the celebration. But I did not waver. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. I sat on my porch with tea in hand, gulls circling overhead, sunlight warming the wood beneath my feet. The sea whispered its eternal promise, steady, unyielding, free. Let them call me selfish, I thought. Let them blame me for storms I did not create. I had made my choice, and it was mine alone. For once, I was not the quiet relative standing in the shadows. I was the guardian of my story, and I would not be moved. Summer arrived soft and green, as if the world itself wanted to remind me of gentler things. I still had the lease back from Olivia, so I remained in my cottage through August. The air smelled of salt and roses, the gulls cried overhead, and each morning I walked barefoot onto the porch with a cup of tea, determined to savor what time remained. The cottage felt different, though. Knowing it no longer belonged to me was a strange ache, like losing a limb you could still feel. Every creak in the floorboards and every hum from the sea-green walls carried both comfort and farewell. I told myself I had made peace with the sale, but grief has its own quiet rhythm. By September, I had found a place to rent in Bristol, a small carriage house tucked behind an old brick mansion. The rent was $2,100 a month, a fair price for a home that smelled of cedar and had enough sunlight to remind me of the cottage. The landlord, a kind man named Mr. Lowell, allowed me to move my blueberry bushes into 2 large clay pots by the back steps. I watched them every morning, their leaves catching the dew, and felt steadier for it. The ocean was only a short walk away. Though it wasn't my shoreline, the water still spoke the same quiet language against the stones. That sound became my anchor. The family did not soften quickly. Margaret stayed silent, a wall of absence between us. Daniel posted bright photographs online for a while, new menus at the restaurant, snapshots of him and Charlotte smiling in front of rented cars. But then his posts stopped altogether, as if the brightness had gone out of him. One day, I received a single text from Charlotte. "We will make our own story," it read. No accusations, no demands, only those words. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, whispered a quiet blessing for her, and wished them both well, out loud, to the empty room. Then I sat at my table, pictured the velvet bear with a hidden diamond, and prayed in silence that it might one day find its way into hands that truly understood its weight. It was Lily who broke through the quiet first. She arrived one afternoon with a tote bag slung over her shoulder, handmade from old curtains stitched into a new purpose. She sat at my little table, her legs swinging like a girl's, though she was nearly grown. Her eyes were bright, though a little nervous. At last, she blurted out, "I think you were brave." Her voice trembled, but her gaze stayed steady. She asked me why I sold the cottage, why I let go of something that seemed like the very center of my being. I told her the truth in plain words. I told her I wanted my choice to be mine, that a house is love, yes, but a house is also wood and stone, and sometimes it needs to be passed along when its weight becomes too great to carry. I told her I was tired of being treated like a package to be moved or a problem to be solved. I wanted dignity, not management. Then I told her about the trust, about the money set aside for her future, if she still wished to study design. She listened, tears brimming, and when they finally spilled over, they were not heavy tears but the good kind, the kind that rinse the eyes and leave the heart lighter. We went walking by the water afterward, sharing a loaf of bread from the bakery down the street. For the first time in months, laughter rose between us, carried off by the wind. In late September, Daniel came to see me. He arrived alone, without Charlotte or his mother, and when I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He was thinner, his shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of battles already lost. The restaurant, he admitted, had closed. Investors pulled out, debts mounted, and the glossy dream collapsed. He sat across from me, his hands around a coffee cup, and for once, there was no performance in him. He looked like the boy I once knew, the one who used to run barefoot along the beach collecting shells. He said quietly, "I'm sorry for the party. I should have protected you." He asked why I hadn't told him about the sale before it happened. I looked at him steadily and replied, "Some storms you watch from the window, and some storms you step around." He nodded, understanding more than my words alone. For a long while, we sat in silence, a silence that felt clean, not accusing. Then he told me he'd found a new job as a manager at a restaurant in Brooklyn. He and Charlotte, he said, were working on a smaller life, simpler, humbler. Before he left, he asked about the diamond. I told him the bear was still missing. His face twisted, pain heavy in his eyes, but then he straightened and said, "I'll keep looking." When he hugged me goodbye, it wasn't long, but it was real. And real hugs are rare. The months carried me forward gently. Winter came with quiet routines. I traveled to Boston for a week to see old friends, and to New York to watch Lily's first costume designs appear on stage in a small play. The trust paid for my train tickets, for my new reading chair, for the simple pleasures that stitched each day together. On Fridays, I bought fresh flowers for the table. I began keeping my own ledger, not in my grandmother's precise European hand, but in my rounder, less orderly script. Besides the numbers, I wrote small notes. Slept well, water calm, found a good peach. Those words, scattered among figures, were reminders that life is not measured only in dollars, but also in moments. In the evenings, I kept the porch light glowing softly and left a book open on the arm of the chair. Some nights I read, some nights I simply listen to the sea. I thought often of the cottage, but not with bitterness. I thought of it as something I carried still, like a shell in my pocket, no longer my home, but always my story. I thought of the bear, too, and sometimes pictured it tucked away on a dusty shelf, waiting to be found. Hope can live in small places. What remained was not the house. It was never just the house. What remained was the part of me that still had the power to choose, the part that had walked through humiliation and betrayal, yet found steadiness again. What remained was the lesson my grandmother whispered without words, that love should never ask you to silence yourself when your own name is at stake. The sea does not apologize for its voice. Neither do I. I am Helen of Newport, a woman who once held a cottage by the sea and let it go with clear eyes. I sold it not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to decide. In the end, I kept what mattered most. I kept the story. I kept my dignity. I kept my peace.